The shadow of the gallows stretched long across the dusty main street of Calistoga, California. As Theodora Nelson stood before the gathering crowd with her hands bound and tears streaming down her face. It wasn't the prospect of hanging that frightened her, it was what would happen to these people if they didn't go through with it. "Please," she begged, her voice carrying across the hushed crowd. "I'm bad luck. I've always been. Everyone around me suffers. You must believe me." The year was 1873, and Calistoga was a growing settlement nestled in Napa Valley, where hot springs and mining opportunities had drawn settlers seeking fortune and healing. The town had been peaceful until Theodora arrived 3 months ago. Since then, the silver mine had collapsed, killing 2 men. A drought had withered crops, and just last week, the general store had burned to the ground. Sheriff Morgan adjusted his hat, uncomfortable with the duty before him. "Miss Nelson, you're accused of witchcraft and bringing misfortune upon this town. Do you have anything else to say before we proceed?" Theodora looked out at the sea of angry faces. "I tried to warn you all when I arrived. I'm not a witch, just cursed. Hanging me won't lift what ails this town." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some nodded in agreement with the sheriff, while others looked uncertain. The drought and mine collapse could be explained by nature and poor engineering, but the string of misfortunes since her arrival had been too consistent to ignore. "This is madness." A deep voice cut through the tension. The crowd parted as a tall man on horseback trotted forward. Dust kicked up beneath the hooves of a magnificent black stallion as its rider approached the makeshift gallows. The stranger dismounted with the practiced ease of someone who'd spent his life in the saddle. His dark brown duster was coated with the dust of long travel, but there was nothing weary about his stance as he stepped between Theodora and the sheriff. "Dallas Kincaid," he introduced himself with a tip of his hat. "Just rode into town and already witnessing a travesty of justice." Sheriff Morgan's hand drifted to his holster. "This ain't your concern, stranger. This woman has brought nothing but misfortune to Calistoga." Dallas studied Theodora's tear-streaked face, then turned back to the sheriff. "Last I checked, bad luck wasn't a hanging offense in California or any other state." "She's a witch," called someone from the crowd. "Is that so?" Dallas's voice remained calm as his eyes scanned the gathering. "I've encountered many things in my travels, but I've yet to meet a genuine witch. Seems to me you folks are looking for someone to blame for your troubles." Theodora stared at the stranger, bewildered by his intervention. "Sir, please don't involve yourself. They're right about the bad luck. Everyone who helps me suffers." Dallas met her gaze, his blue eyes steady beneath the brim of his hat. "Then my luck just changed for good," he replied with a confident half-smile. "I've always been partial to taking chances." The sheriff stepped forward. "Kincaid, was it? I suggest you move along. This town has voted." "Has it?" Dallas turned to face the crowd. "All in favor of hanging a woman because crops failed and a mine collapsed. That's not justice, that's fear." An older man stepped forward from the crowd. Theodora recognized him as Mr. Paulson, the town doctor. "The stranger has a point. We're better than this, folks. This isn't why we came west." Sheriff Morgan looked uncomfortable. "What do you propose then, Kincaid? She's brought nothing but trouble." "I'll take responsibility for her," Dallas said, the words coming out before he'd fully thought them through. "If any more misfortune befalls this town while she's in my custody, you can hold us both accountable." Theodora's eyes widened. "You don't know what you're saying." "I know exactly what I'm saying, miss," Dallas replied, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "I've faced worse odds than a streak of bad luck." After much debate among the townspeople, Sheriff Morgan reluctantly agreed to release Theodora into Dallas's custody, though he made it clear they weren't welcome to linger in Calistoga. As Dallas untied her hands, Theodora whispered, "Why would you do this? You're risking everything for a stranger. Let's just say I recognize the look of someone who's been judged unfairly," he answered, helping her onto his horse before mounting behind her. "Besides, I've never been one to pass by when I could step in." With the wary eyes of the townspeople upon them, Dallas guided his horse down the main street toward the edge of town. Theodora sat rigid in front of him, afraid to relax against the solid warmth of his chest. "Where will you take me?" she asked. "First, somewhere you can rest and get cleaned up," he replied. "There's a cabin about 2 miles outside of town. Friend of mine isn't using it this season. After that, it's your choice. I can escort you to Sacramento or San Francisco, somewhere you can make a fresh start." "You still don't understand," Theodora insisted. "The bad luck will follow me, it always does. Your kindness will be repaid with misfortune." Dallas chuckled. "Miss Nelson, I've survived Apache raids, sandstorms, and more gunfights than I care to count. A little bad luck doesn't scare me." "It should," she whispered, but she didn't pull away when his arm tightened slightly around her waist to steady her as they crossed a small stream. The cabin was modest but well-maintained, nestled in a grove of pine trees with a small creek running nearby. Inside, it was clean and furnished simply with a table, chairs, a small stove, and a bed in the corner separated by a curtain for privacy. "You can have the bed," Dallas said as he brought in his saddlebags. "I'll sleep by the fire." Theodora stood awkwardly in the center of the cabin. "Mr. Kincaid, Dallas, please." "Dallas," she corrected. "I appreciate what you did back there, but you need to understand, this isn't superstition. My entire life has been marked by disaster. My parents died in a house fire when I was 12. The family that took me in lost their farm to locusts. The ship I worked passage on to California nearly sank in a storm that appeared from nowhere." Her voice broke. "I've tried to live alone to spare others, but somehow I always end up causing harm." Dallas set down his bags and looked at her thoughtfully. "Have you considered that perhaps it's not you causing these things, but rather you surviving them? That speaks to strength, not a curse." Theodora blinked, never having considered this perspective. Before she could respond, Dallas continued, "Rest now. Tomorrow we'll figure out our next steps." True to his word, Dallas gave her privacy to wash and change into a clean dress he'd purchased from a general store on their way out of town. That night, as promised, he slept on a bedroll near the stove while Theodora took the bed, lying awake for hours listening to his steady breathing and wondering how long it would be before disaster struck. She awoke to the smell of coffee and bacon. Dallas had already been up, fetched water, and started breakfast. The normalcy of the scene was disarming. "Did you sleep well?" he asked, sliding a plate toward her as she approached the table. "Better than I expected," she admitted, still wary. "No bad luck yet." "Well, I discovered we're out of sugar for the coffee, if that counts," he replied with a grin. Despite herself, Theodora smiled back. They spent the day getting to know each other. Dallas explained that he'd spent years working as a cowhand and scout throughout the territories before deciding to try his luck in California. He was deliberately vague about why he'd left his previous life behind, but Theodora sensed a story there, perhaps one as complex as her own. "What about you?" he asked as they sat on the cabin's small porch watching the sunset. "Before the bad luck, what was your life like?" Theodora hesitated, unused to speaking about her past. "I grew up in Boston. My father was a professor of literature. My mother taught me to play the piano and speak French." She smiled sadly at the memory. "After they died, I moved between relatives and employers, never staying long once things started to go wrong. Eventually, I decided to come west, hoping for a fresh start." And how did you end up in Calistoga? I was heading to San Francisco, but the stagecoach broke down. While it was being repaired, I took a room at the boarding house. The owner, Mrs. Finch, was kind. She offered me work helping with the guests. Theodora's expression darkened. A week later, her son fell from a horse and broke his leg. Then the well ran dry. I should have left then, but I had nowhere to go and no money left. Dallas listened without judgment. And you truly believe you caused these misfortunes? What other explanation is there? She asked. The pattern has followed me my entire life. Patterns can be coincidence, Dallas suggested, or perhaps something we impose on random events to make sense of them. You think I want to believe I'm cursed? Theodora's voice rose slightly. I've prayed for it not to be true. I've tried to convince myself otherwise, but the evidence. Dallas reached out, hesitating before gently taking her hand. I understand belief, Theodora, but sometimes what we believe about ourselves isn't the full truth. His touch was warm and steady, and for a moment, Theodora allowed herself to hope. Maybe he was right. Maybe. A crack of thunder split the air, making them both jump. Dark clouds had gathered on the horizon without either of them noticing, and the wind suddenly picked up, cold and threatening. Storm's coming fast, Dallas observed, standing and pulling Theodora to her feet. We'd better get inside. Theodora's face had gone pale. You see, it was clear just moments ago. It's spring in the mountains, Dallas countered, ushering her inside. Weather changes quickly here. But even as he said it, the ferocity with which the storm descended upon them was unsettling. Wind howled around the cabin, rattling the shutters. Rain lashed against the windows with such force that Dallas worried the glass might break. As they secured the cabin against the tempest, a particularly strong gust tore one of the shutters free. Dallas rushed to fix it, despite Theodora's protests. "Stay inside," he shouted over the wind. "Please don't," she begged. "This is how it starts. Let the shutter go." But Dallas was already out the door. Theodora watched in horror through the window as he fought against the wind to reach the flapping shutter. Just as he grabbed it, a loud crack sounded overhead. A large branch from the nearby pine tree snapped off, hurtling toward him. "Dallas!" she screamed. He looked up just in time to dive out of the way, but not completely. The branch struck his shoulder, sending him sprawling into the mud. Ignoring her own safety, Theodora ran outside, rain instantly soaking her to the skin as she helped him to his feet. "Are you hurt?" she cried, struggling to support his weight. Dallas grimaced but managed to stand. "Just bruised, I think. Nothing broken." Together they staggered back into the cabin, both drenched and shivering. Theodora immediately began building up the fire while Dallas removed his wet coat, wincing as he moved his injured shoulder. "Let me look at that," she insisted once the fire was blazing. Reluctantly, Dallas sat on a chair and allowed her to examine his shoulder. She gently probed the area, relieved to find no obvious break, though a nasty bruise was already forming. "You were lucky," she murmured, then caught herself. "I'm sorry. This is my fault. Don't you see? Not even a day has passed and you're already hurt because of me." Dallas caught her hand as she turned away. "Theodora, branches fall in storms. That's nature, not a curse." But the storm itself was building all afternoon if we'd been paying attention to more than our conversation, he insisted. "I've seen storms like this before. There's nothing supernatural about it." Theodora wanted desperately to believe him, but decades of experience told her otherwise. Still, as she helped him change into dry clothes and prepared a poultice for his bruised shoulder, she couldn't deny the comfort she felt in his presence, curse or no curse. That night, with the storm still raging outside, they sat close to the fire, wrapped in blankets. Despite her fears, Theodora found herself opening up about her life in ways she never had before. Perhaps it was the isolation of the cabin, or Dallas's patient listening, but words flowed from her like the rain outside. She told him about the loneliness of always keeping people at a distance, about the guilt she carried for each misfortune she believed she'd caused, about her dreams of someday finding peace. In turn, Dallas shared more of his own story. He had been a restless soul, never staying in one place too long, working as a cowhand, a scout for the army, even briefly as a deputy in Arizona Territory. "What made you leave that life behind?" Theodora asked. Dallas stared into the fire for a long moment before answering. "I shot a man," he said finally. "He needed shooting, was trying to rob the bank where a friend's wife worked, but afterward I realized I didn't want that life anymore, didn't want to be known as a man quick with a gun." He looked up at her. "So I headed west to start fresh." "We have that in common then," Theodora observed softly. "Both seeking new beginnings." Their eyes met across the small space between them, and something shifted in the atmosphere of the cabin. Despite her certainty that nothing good could come of it, Theodora felt drawn to this man who had risked himself to save her, who looked at her without fear. The storm continued through the night and into the next day. They remained in the cabin, talking, sharing the simple tasks of cooking and keeping the fire going. By the time the weather cleared on the third day, Theodora realized with a start that nothing truly terrible had happened despite the storm's ferocity. Dallas's shoulder was healing well. The cabin had weathered the storm with only minor damage, and when they stepped outside into the bright sunshine, the world seemed washed clean rather than devastated. "See," Dallas said, noting her expression of wonder as she took in the glistening landscape. "Sometimes a storm is just a storm." For the first time in years, Theodora allowed herself to consider the possibility that perhaps her curse wasn't as all-encompassing as she'd believed. But old fears don't disappear overnight, and she remained cautious as they began to plan their next move. "We should head toward Sacramento," Dallas suggested as they repaired the broken shutter together. "I have connections there who might help you find suitable work." Theodora hesitated. "Perhaps it would be better if we parted ways. I'm grateful for your help, truly, but—" "You're still worried about your bad luck affecting me," Dallas finished for her. He set down his hammer and turned to face her fully. "Theodora, in the days we've spent together, I've seen nothing to convince me you're cursed. Unlucky at times, perhaps, but so is everyone." "The storm was a spring storm in the mountains," he insisted. "My shoulder will heal. The cabin is intact. If you were truly cursed, shouldn't worse have happened?" Theodora had no answer for that. The pattern she'd observed throughout her life seemed to be breaking, and she didn't know whether to trust this new reality or fear that an even greater disaster was building. As if reading her thoughts, Dallas gently placed his hands on her shoulders. "I'm not asking you to stop believing what you've experienced. I'm just suggesting that perhaps there's more to the story than you've allowed yourself to see." The warmth of his touch sent a flutter through her chest that had nothing to do with fear or curses. For a moment, Theodora let herself imagine a different future, one where she wasn't alone, where she didn't have to keep running. "Give it time," Dallas continued. "Come with me to Sacramento. If misfortune follows, I promise I'll help you move on, no questions asked. But if it doesn't—" He left the sentence hanging, a possibility too fragile to name. Against her better judgment, Theodora nodded. "All right, to Sacramento." The journey would take several days on horseback. They set out the following morning, Dallas having purchased supplies from a nearby farm. He insisted on paying for everything despite Theodora's protests. "Consider it an investment," he said with a wink that made her cheeks warm. The first day of travel passed uneventfully. They followed trails through the rolling hills, Dallas pointing out landmarks and sharing stories of his travels. Theodora gradually relaxed, allowing herself to enjoy the journey and the company. They camped that night beneath a canopy of stars, the air crisp and clear after the recent storms. As they sat by their small fire, Dallas pulled a harmonica from his saddlebag and began to play a gentle melody. "I didn't know you were musical," Theodora remarked, enchanted by both the music and the sight of this rugged man creating something so beautiful. Dallas paused. "Just something I picked up during long nights on the trail. My mother always said music soothes the troubled soul." She was right, Theodora agreed. After a moment's hesitation, she added, "I used to sing before. Everything." "Would you sing now?" Dallas asked quietly. No one had asked her to sing in years. Music had been one of the many joys she'd denied herself, afraid that even this small pleasure might somehow trigger disaster. But here, under the vast sky with Dallas's encouraging smile, the old fear seemed distant. Theodora cleared her throat and began to sing "Beautiful Dreamer," her voice hesitant at first, but growing stronger with each note. Dallas joined in with his harmonica, the two creating an impromptu duet that filled the night air. When the song ended, they sat in companionable silence, both aware that something significant had shifted between them. "Thank you," Dallas said finally. "For what?" "For sharing that part of yourself, for trusting me enough to do so." Theodora looked down at her hands. "It's been a long time since I felt I could trust anyone, or that anyone would want to be trusted by me." Dallas reached across the space between them, his hand covering hers. "I want to know all of you, Theodora. The parts you hide away, the parts you're afraid of. Everything." The intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. No man had ever looked at her that way, as if she were something precious rather than dangerous. The feeling it evoked was both thrilling and terrifying. "You barely know me," she whispered. "I know enough," he replied. "I know you're kind, even when you're afraid. I know you're stronger than you believe. I know that when you sing, it feels like the whole world stops to listen." Tears pricked at Theodora's eyes. "And what if my curse is real? What if I bring you harm?" "Then we'll face it together," Dallas said simply. "I'd rather take that chance than wonder for the rest of my life what might have been." He leaned forward slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away. Theodora knew she should. Everything she believed about herself told her to push him away, to protect him from what she was. But as his lips met hers in a gentle kiss, she found herself responding, her hands moving to his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her palm. The kiss deepened, years of loneliness and longing pouring out of her as Dallas pulled her closer. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Theodora felt as if something had cracked open inside her, a wall she'd built so high and so thick that she'd forgotten it was there until it began to crumble. "I'm afraid," she admitted, resting her forehead against his. "I know," he murmured. "But fear doesn't have to define us." They slept that night with their bedrolls close together, hands entwined between them. For the first time in memory, Theodora's dreams were peaceful, unmarred by the nightmares that usually plagued her. The next morning, they continued their journey, the landscape gradually changing as they made their way toward Sacramento. Theodora found herself watching for signs of misfortune, old habits dying hard, but each day passed without incident. On the third day, they encountered a small family traveling in a wagon heading north. The mother was heavily pregnant, the father looking exhausted as he tried to manage both the team of oxen and their 3 young children. Theodora tensed as Dallas suggested they offer assistance. "Perhaps we should keep our distance," she whispered urgently. Dallas gave her a gentle look. "They need help, Theodora. If you're right about your curse, wouldn't it affect them whether we stop or not? And if you're wrong?" Reluctantly, she nodded, though her stomach knotted with anxiety as Dallas hailed the wagon. The family, the Robertsons, were indeed grateful for the assistance. Their wagon had a broken axle, and they had been struggling to repair it while keeping the children safe and fed. Dallas immediately set to work helping Mr. Robertson with the repairs, while Theodora found herself drawn into conversation with Mrs. Robertson. "You're a blessing," the tired woman said as Theodora helped prepare a meal for the children. "We've been on the road for weeks, heading to my sister's place near Fort Jones. Thomas lost his job at the mill, and we had nowhere else to go." "I'm sorry to hear that," Theodora said, carefully cutting bread for the hungry children. "It must be difficult traveling in your condition." Mrs. Robertson placed a hand on her swollen belly. "The baby wasn't part of our plans, but the Lord provides in His own way." She smiled warmly. "Your husband is a good man to stop and help strangers." Theodora blushed. "Oh, Dallas isn't my husband. We're just traveling together." Mrs. Robertson gave her a knowing look but didn't press further. "Well, whatever your arrangement, we're grateful you both stopped." By nightfall, the wagon was repaired. The Robertsons invited Dallas and Theodora to share their camp for the evening, an offer they accepted after a brief, whispered consultation. "Nothing bad has happened," Dallas pointed out quietly. "Yet," Theodora countered, but her protest lacked conviction. That evening, as they sat around the campfire sharing stories with the Robertson family, something extraordinary happened. The youngest child, a girl of about 4, wandered over to Theodora and climbed into her lap without invitation or hesitation. "You're pretty," the child declared, reaching up to touch Theodora's hair. Mrs. Robertson started to call the girl back, but Theodora shook her head. "It's all right," she said, her voice thick with emotion as she carefully put her arms around the small child. Across the fire, Dallas watched the scene with a soft smile. When their eyes met, Theodora saw in his gaze a reflection of her own realization. Nothing terrible had happened. No sudden illness had struck the child. No disaster had befallen the camp. Just a moment of simple human connection, the kind Theodora had denied herself for so long. Later, as they prepared for sleep, Dallas whispered, "Still believe you're cursed?" Theodora looked back at the wagon where the Robertson family was settling for the night. "I don't know what to believe anymore," she admitted. "All my life, I've seen patterns that seem to confirm what I feared, but these past days with you—" She shook her head, unable to articulate the transformation occurring within her. Dallas took her hand, bringing it to his lips. "Perhaps that's a start, being willing to question what you've always believed." The next morning, they parted ways with the Robertsons, continuing their journey toward Sacramento. Theodora felt lighter somehow, as if she'd set down a burden she hadn't realized she was carrying. "What will happen when we reach Sacramento?" she asked as they rode side by side along a well-traveled road. "That depends," Dallas replied. "What do you want to happen?" The question caught her off guard. For so long, her only goal had been survival, keeping others safe from her supposed curse. The idea of wanting something more seemed almost foreign. "I don't know," she said honestly. "I haven't allowed myself to want things for a very long time." Dallas nodded thoughtfully. "Well, I have a friend who owns a hotel there. He might have work for you if you're interested. Or there are other opportunities in a city that size." "And you?" Theodora asked, her heart beating faster. "What will you do?" Dallas was quiet for a moment. "I was thinking I might stay for a while. Sacramento's a good place to put down roots, if you wanted company while you did the same." The unspoken question hung between them. Theodora knew what he was offering, not just companionship on the journey, but beyond. A future together, if she was willing to take the risk. Before she could respond, The sound of gunshots echoed from somewhere ahead. Dallas immediately reined in his horse, his posture alert. "Stay here," he instructed, reaching for the rifle secured to his saddle. "No," Theodora protested, fear gripping her. This was the disaster she'd been waiting for. "Dallas, please, let's turn back." More gunshots sounded, followed by shouts. Dallas hesitated, clearly torn between caution and the desire to help whoever was in trouble. "At least let me come with you," Theodora urged. "Don't leave me behind." After a brief internal struggle, Dallas nodded. "Stay close. At the first sign of serious danger, we ride away." "Agreed." They proceeded cautiously, following the sounds until they came upon a scene of chaos. A stagecoach had been stopped in the middle of the road, two masked men attempting to rob the passengers while a third held the driver at gunpoint. "Bandits," Dallas whispered, pulling Theodora behind the cover of a large oak tree. "We should," before he could finish, one of the passengers, an elderly man, attempted to fight back, resulting in a struggle for a weapon. A shot rang out and the passenger fell. Dallas's expression hardened. "I can't stand by and watch this," he said, checking his rifle. "Theodora, take the horse and go if things get worse." "Dallas, no." She grabbed his arm. "This is exactly what I was afraid of. Please don't risk yourself." His eyes softened as he looked at her. "Some risks are worth taking, Theodora. I learned that the day I met you." Before she could protest further, Dallas had moved into position. With practiced precision, he fired a warning shot into the air. "That's enough," he called out, his voice commanding attention. "Release those passengers and be on your way, or the next shot won't be a warning." The bandits whirled, one firing wildly in their direction. Dallas pulled Theodora down as the bullet splintered bark above their heads. "Stay here," he insisted, moving to a better position to return fire. What followed was a brief but intense exchange of gunfire. Theodora watched in horror as Dallas engaged the bandits, forcing them to take cover behind the stagecoach. Her heart pounded in her chest, certain that her curse had led them to this moment, that Dallas would pay the price for helping her. One of the bandits made a break for the horses tethered nearby. Dallas tracked him with his rifle but hesitated to fire at a fleeing man. In that moment of hesitation, another bandit emerged from behind the stagecoach, pistol aimed directly at Dallas. Without thinking, Theodora grabbed a rock from the ground and threw it with all her might. It wasn't much of a weapon, but it struck the bandit's arm just as he fired, causing his shot to go wide. Dallas heard the shot and spun, quickly taking aim and winging the man in the shoulder. The bandit dropped his weapon, cursing loudly. Seeing their advantage lost, the third bandit called out to his companions. "Let's go. It ain't worth it." The three men scrambled for their horses. The wounded one helped by his companions and galloped away down the road. Dallas rushed to check on the passengers, finding the elderly man wounded but alive, the bullet having grazed his arm rather than striking anything vital. The other passengers were shaken but unharmed. As Dallas helped tend to the wounded man, Theodora stood frozen, processing what had just happened. By all rights, according to her belief in her curse, Dallas should have been shot. The bandit had him dead to rights, yet her impulsive action had changed that outcome. If she truly carried a curse, would she have been able to save him? Wouldn't her intervention have somehow made things worse rather than better? The stagecoach driver, grateful for their help, insisted on giving them a ride the rest of the way to Sacramento once the elderly passenger was bandaged and comfortable. Dallas accepted, securing his horse to the back of the coach. As they settled into the coach alongside the other passengers, Dallas leaned close to Theodora. "You saved my life back there," he said quietly. "That rock was perfectly timed." Theodora met his gaze, her worldview shifting once again. If I were truly cursed, I shouldn't have been able to help you, she said slowly, working through the realization. My intervention should have made things worse, not better. Dallas smiled, taking her hand in his. Perhaps it's time to consider that your belief in this curse has been the real curse all along, keeping you isolated, making you fear connection. The elderly passenger, overhearing their conversation, leaned forward. Begging your pardon, miss, but I couldn't help overhearing. Are you the woman they were going to hang in Calistoga? The one they said brought bad luck? Theodora tensed, but nodded reluctantly. News travels fast, I see, the man chuckled. My nephew works at the telegraph office there, told me all about it when I visited last week. He glanced at Dallas. Also mentioned a cowboy who rode in and stopped it. Guess that would be you, sir. Dallas nodded acknowledgement. Well, the man continued, I'd say anyone who just saved us from those bandits is bringing mighty good luck, not bad. Sometimes folks just need someone to blame when times get hard. The other passengers murmured agreement, looking at Theodora with gratitude rather than suspicion. You see, Dallas whispered as the conversation turned to other topics. Not everyone is quick to judge. For the remainder of the journey to Sacramento, Theodora sat quietly, processing everything that had happened. The encounter with the bandits should have confirmed her worst fears, placing Dallas in mortal danger. Instead, it had done the opposite, challenging the foundation of beliefs she'd held for most of her life. If she wasn't cursed, what did that mean for her future? For the possibilities that Dallas had hinted at. Sacramento in 1873 was a bustling city, having grown from its gold rush beginnings into a vital commercial center. As the stagecoach pulled into the city, Theodora took in the busy streets, the substantial buildings, the sense of permanence so different from the transient existence she had known. Dallas's friend Jacob owned the Golden State Hotel, a respectable establishment catering to businessmen and travelers of means. He welcomed Dallas with a hearty embrace and greeted Theodora with polite curiosity. Any friend of Dallas is welcome here, he assured her, instructing his staff to prepare their best available rooms. As promised, Jacob was open to offering Theodora employment, impressed by her refined manner and education. We could use someone to manage the front desk and correspondence, he suggested. Our clientele appreciates dealing with someone of culture and good breeding. For the first time in years, Theodora found herself making plans that extended beyond immediate survival. She accepted Jacob's offer, and Dallas took a position with a local rancher who supplied beef to the hotels and restaurants of Sacramento. They settled into a routine, seeing each other in the evenings and on Theodora's days off. Dallas took her riding in the hills surrounding the city, taught her to shoot a skill she'd never imagined needing, and introduced her to the simple pleasures of picnics by the American River. As weeks passed without disaster, Theodora's belief in her curse gradually faded. There were mishaps, of course a rainstorm that ruined a picnic, a minor kitchen fire at the hotel quickly extinguished, Dallas taking a fall from a horse and spraining his wrist. But these were the normal vicissitudes of life, not evidence of supernatural misfortune. One evening, 3 months after their arrival in Sacramento, Dallas invited Theodora to dinner at a small restaurant near the hotel. He seemed unusually nervous, adjusting his collar and checking his pocket repeatedly. Is everything all right? Theodora asked as they settled at their table. Dallas smiled, reaching across to take her hand. Better than all right. I've been doing a lot of thinking, Theodora, about the future, about us. Her heart quickened. Have you? When I rode into Calistoga that day, I had no plan beyond finding work and perhaps a place to settle. I certainly didn't expect to ride out with a woman who would change everything I thought I knew about myself. Theodora squeezed his hand. "I could say the same about you. These past months with you have been the happiest of my life," Dallas continued. "I know it hasn't been long in the usual way of things, but I've never been more certain of anything." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. "Theodora Nelson, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Tears sprang to Theodora's eyes as Dallas opened the box to reveal a simple but elegant ring with a small diamond catching the lamplight. For a moment, old fears threatened to resurface. What if she was wrong? What if the curse was merely dormant? But as she looked into Dallas's steadfast gaze, she knew her answer. Whatever came, they would face it together. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "yes, I will marry you, Dallas Kincaid." The wedding took place in October, a small ceremony attended by the friends they had made in Sacramento. Jacob stood as Dallas's best man, while Mrs. Robertson, who had safely delivered a healthy baby boy and was visiting her sister near Sacramento, stood with Theodora. As they exchanged vows, Theodora felt a sense of peace she had never known before. The woman who had once warned an entire town about her bad luck was now promising to love and cherish a man who had seen beyond her fears to the person she truly was. Their first year of marriage brought its share of challenges. The economic downturn of 1873 affected businesses throughout Sacramento, including the Golden State Hotel. Jacob was forced to reduce staff, though he kept Theodora on due to her excellent work. Dallas's employer sold his ranch, leaving Dallas to find new work. For a time, they lived frugally, carefully managing their savings. But these hardships were faced together, with a resilience born of their shared experiences. In the spring of 1874, an opportunity arose. A small ranch outside Sacramento came up for sale at a price they could manage with their combined savings and a loan from Jacob. The property included a modest house, a stable, and enough land to raise cattle and horses. "What do you think?" Dallas asked as they stood on the porch of what could be their new home. "It would be a risk, starting our own place." Theodora looked out at the land stretching before them, imagining the life they could build here. "Some risks are worth taking," she said, echoing his words from that day with the bandits. "I think it's perfect." They named it Lucky Strike Ranch, a private joke between them that symbolized their journey. Dallas had a talent for horseflesh, and soon developed a reputation for breeding and training quality horses for both work and racing. Theodora, drawing on her education, kept the books and correspondence, eventually expanding into breeding thoroughbreds as well. Their complementary skills made the ranch a success, despite the economic challenges of the times. In the winter of 1875, their first child was born, a son they named Daniel, after Dallas's father. 2 years later, they welcomed a daughter, Elizabeth. As their family grew, so did the ranch, becoming known throughout the region for its fine horses and hospitable owners. Occasionally, travelers would pass through with stories of Calistoga. The town had recovered from its streak of bad luck, though some still told tales of the witch who had nearly been hanged. Few connected that woman with the respected Mrs. Kincaid of Lucky Strike Ranch. On the 5th anniversary of the day Dallas rode into Calistoga, he and Theodora sat on the porch of their home, watching their children play in the yard as the sun set over their land. "You ever think about it?" Dallas asked. "The curse?" Theodora smiled, leaning her head against his shoulder. "Sometimes. Not as something I believe in anymore, but as a reminder of how fear can shape our perceptions. You never did bring me bad luck," Dallas observed, his arm tightening around her waist. "No," she agreed. "Quite the opposite, it seems." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the first stars appear in the darkening sky. The woman who once warned townspeople of her bad luck had found that love was stronger than fear, that belief could change reality, and that sometimes the greatest risk of all opening one's heart brought the greatest reward. "I was right that day in Calistoga," Dallas said softly, "when I told you my luck had changed for good." Theodora tilted her face up to his, love filling her heart as completely as it had the day they wed. "For both of us," she whispered, before his lips met hers in a kiss that held all the promise of their shared future, a future built not on luck, but on choice, courage, and unwavering love. Years later, the story of Dallas and Theodora Kincaid became something of a legend in Northern California. People spoke of the cursed woman and the cowboy who loved her, embellishing the tale with each telling until it was more fiction than fact. But at Lucky Strike Ranch, the truth was simpler and more profound. Two people who had been searching, one for a place to belong, one for freedom from fear, had found in each other exactly what they needed. And in doing so, they had created a legacy of love that would endure long after they were gone, passed down through generations as a reminder that sometimes the bravest act of all is to believe in the possibility of happiness.